You want the good news or you want the bad news? The bad news is you still haven't been drafted. The good news, 5 quarterbacks in NFL history drafted in the second round have gone on to win NFL MVP or the Super Bowl, including your most recent in Jalen Hurts. Maybe the carrot currently dangling out in front of Shedeur Sanders.
We all didn't expect this, of course, but I feel like with God, anything possible, everything possible. I don't feel like this happened, for no reason. All this is, of course, fuel to the fire. And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things. Tomorrow's the day. We're going to be happy regardless. Legendary.
All right, some words there from Shedeur Sanders after his disappointment here on day one of the NFL draft. Wilson and Ran Carthon here to react and push it forward, because the reality is exactly what he just said. He will have a team, and he now has a bigger chip on his shoulder to do something at the next level. Ran, when you look at the possible landing spots for Shedeur now, and we look at the early stages of that second round, what does it look like?
I think you still have QB-needy teams that entered day one needing quarterbacks that didn't make those picks, and you start with the Cleveland Browns, and we've talked about them sitting at 33 and 36. Could they do it? Possibly. And then you have the Raiders, because you traded for a veteran in Geno Smith, and why not have, if you have the opportunity to take a Shedeur Sanders and have him there to learn under Geno and bring him along, that's a good landing spot for him. And then the Saints at 40, we talked about them being linked to Jackson Dart and allegedly going to want to move up to take a guy, and now Shedeur may possibly be staring you in the face at 40. And I add, at some point or along this entire process, he's met with all 3 of those teams. And so there is some familiarity there. You're not just taking a shot on the guy just because he's there.
Ryan, when you look at Shedeur and all that he can be at the next level, the skill set that he does bring, and the words that he offers there in his moment of disappointment, how do you really sum up this first day of the draft for Shedeur?
You know, it's funny because you mentioned Jalen Hurts, and I think that's instructive on some level, because I remember the Senior Bowl that year ran where it was Jordan Love there, Justin Herbert there, and oh, by the way, Jalen Hurts was the afterthought, fair or unfair. And I think Jalen Hurts quietly went about his business, did what he could in terms of what he could control, got drafted in the second round, as you noted, Joe, and then the rest is history, so to speak. He's certainly been more effective over the course of his career than either the first-round picks or the Senior Bowl in that year, and I think that's the way that Shedeur and his camp have to approach this. You can't control anything other than once your name is finally called, and what are you going to do from that point on? And there may be conversations down the road about maybe Shedeur rub some of these teams the wrong way, and he can use that as a learning experience going forward as well. Because, again, he's a young man. He's 22, 23 years old. He has a long future ahead of him, but it's important to learn from your mistakes in much the same way Jalen Hurts used that as motivation, not being a first-round pick, even though, as it turns out, he should have been.
We have learned from the past, certainly over these last decades, and seen how you build football teams, and it's a little bit on day one. You want those star performers, but the depth, the real meat of rosters being built over these next couple of days. And we're looking at an interesting start to this second round with, as you mentioned, Cleveland having 2 picks early on. The Chicago Bears also 2 early picks. The phones might be ringing here in the not-too-distant future once that clock is active once again. How do you see the top of that second playing out for the Browns specifically?
Well, the Browns can go a lot of areas, because if you're looking at their wide receiver core, they still do not have a complement for Jerry Jeudy, right? And so we've talked about quarterback being a spot. Now you look at receiver, because for a long time they were expected to take Travis Hunter at 2, who was going to fill that role.
Right.
And then you look in the backfield now, because Nick Chubb is still unsigned. And so will they look at a running back at one of those 2 spots? So I expect them to kind of continue to bolster the offensive side with picks 33 and 36.
I'll give you 2 names that could be potential targets there. Luther Burden III out of Missouri, big slot receiver, 6 feet, 200 pounds, ran sub 4.5. Really good in 2023. Quarterback situation was suspect because of injuries last year. And then Trey Henderson, who I thought had a chance to sneak into the back of the first round, the Ohio State running back, who can certainly run. We know what he can do there, but he will block, and he's an asset in the pass game. And those 2 guys immediately make that offense a lot better, even though, much like the Steelers, there are some questions at the quarterback position for Cleveland.
Yeah, holes to fill in. We'll see if they do select at both of those spots or continue to maximize as they did here on day one of the NFL draft. You said you'll give me 2 names. I need 2 more from you. But let's start on the offensive side of the football. A name or 2 that really interests you heading into day 2, value presented that maybe even could have been a day one name.
Yeah, so offensive side, let's see here. Shedeur is obviously still out there. We've talked about him. Luther Burden is next on my big board. And then I'll mention offensive lineman, Arante Ursary. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about him, the Minnesota left tackle. I wouldn't call him developmental, but he certainly needs some room to grow. Maybe not a day one starter. That could also be an option there as we scroll down my little big board here. The other name I'll mention, tight end Gunnar Helm. I like him a lot out of Texas. Ran in the 4.8s at the combine, but here's how tough he is. He ran on a bum ankle. I would have encouraged him as his agent not to run and then run the 4.6 at his pro day. He did it anyway. He plays much faster than that. He could be a potential target at some point on day two.
A lot was made about this tight end class and the talent up top there. We did see a couple go in the first round of the NFL draft, but as narrative gets drawn and as these names get filled into the slots, you get stretched out, and you do find guys like Helm, who in a different Plinko, if the chip falls in a different place, could have also heard his name earlier on. We're seeing all this value in the second round and where it's going to end up. A couple offensive names from you, Ran.
For me, and Ryan mentioned Luther Burden, being one, and just a guy that he's a big slot now, but I think in time and in the right system, he's going to learn to play outside and be able to be moved around. And then I love the Gunnar Helm pick as well. But then you're looking at a guy like Isaiah Bond, who's here, had an incident come up here late, but you're talking about still an explosive wide receiver who can stretch the field, who's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. And so those are two guys, and especially with this receiver depth being where it is, and now you're going to start seeing these guys come off the board in day two.
Another individual that prior to this season, maybe we thought that he'd be serving the role that his counterpart at Texas and Golden did here on day one. So we'll see what happens for those offensive names. Defensive depth, always a need in this physical league. When you look to some of those day two names, who excites you, maybe opportunity early on in that second round?
The first guy that jumps off to me is Mike Green, because Mike Green was mocked to go as high as 15 at one point, possibly to the Atlanta Falcons, and there was a lot of interest from there. But in my mind, I think Mike Green is probably the most natural pass rusher, just in terms of being coordinated and understanding how to set up the moves. And then you go with a guy like Will Johnson, a big corner who was a projected first-round pick as well, who fits different schemes. Now, he had the injury that caused him to miss some time, and like like Ryan said,
we'll draft him too.
he didn't run. And the fact that he didn't run and there were questions about the speed is giving some teams some pause. Because I think if he ran, and if he would have run in the 4.5 range, we would have saw his name called today.
Nope, exactly. That's right. And there was some concern whether he could do that. We'll never know. And now he'll be a day two pick. Nick Emmanwori, the safety out of South Carolina, tested through the roof, had great tape. I think he was just a victim of getting pushed down because teams were focusing on other needs. He's a first-round talent in my mind. You see here, he's the best available safety. Kevin Winston Jr. was hurt for much of the season out of Penn State. Then he showed up after a knee injury, ran a 4.5 about a month ago. He mentioned Will Johnson, Rand did. You also have Suvone Revel. You have Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, who had the injury history. Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Jackson Dart described him as the best cornerback he faced in the SEC, his teammate for the Rebs. So there's going to be a run, it feels like, on cornerbacks, because after the next 5 or 6 cornerbacks, there may be a gap before we see the next group off the board, probably late day 2, early day 3.
I want to talk about great tape. Ryan Wilson, Ran Carthon, doing it here all night long on CBS Sports HQ. Gentlemen, we thank you. We do know the work is not done yet for these fellas. Join them for in-depth conversations all weekend long, including a breakdown of the first round on With the First Pick.